Good morning, friends. Good morning, and welcome to another episode of PB Reads the Bible. I'm PB. I'm the pastor here at Christ United Methodist Church, and today is episode number 25 on our journey through the book of 1 Samuel. This is 11th or 12th, or I'm sorry, this is, I think, the 12th, either 12th or 13th book of the Bible we've done. So I don't know what total number episode it is. It's well into the hundreds, probably into the thousands by now. But it is definitely episode 25 on our journey through the book of 1 Samuel. Today we are going to look at chapters 28 and 29. Even though 30 is decently long, 31 is kind of brief. I'm not sure if I'm going to read both of them tomorrow, or if we'll just do one tomorrow and one on Thursday and start fresh next week. I think that's probably what we're going to end up doing, start fresh next week with 2 Samuel. We are just going to move right into 2 Samuel, because as just a reminder, I said this yesterday, but I know I also said it at the beginning of our journey, that 1st and 2nd Samuel originally were just one book, one text, one giant scroll, you might say. And in the Hebrew Bible, it is still listed as one. It's just Samuel. It's not 1 Samuel or 2 Samuel. It's just Samuel. A good morning, Cheryl. Yes, a little bit cooler, but going to get nice and warm today, and going to get hot tomorrow by the sound of it too. So enjoy the coolness. Get out there early, and then head back into the inside for the remainder of the day. You might want to do that. So I think I did all the announcements actually. But anyway, let's finish up the early stuff, house cleaning kind of things, right? Go ahead and check in. Let me know that you're there, that you're watching. I see a number. They tell me a number of viewers, they being Facebook and YouTube, but they don't tell me who you are. And I do kind of like to know that, even if you're not watching live, because I appreciate the fact that some of you watch this at other times than 9 o'clock in the morning, because you have other things going on in your life. But you find time to watch these, which is incredible, that you find it that interesting and valuable. I appreciate that. Also use the comment section to make comments or ask questions about what I say or what I don't say. Maybe you pick up on something that I don't, which is awesome, which is truly awesome. I also use it to share prayer requests, because we're in this together, right, folks? And sharing life together in this fashion. And so we keep each other surrounded by prayer. So we do that. Good morning, Maureen. Good morning, Ron. Ron is live today. That's wonderful. Great to have you with us. And great to have you, Maureen. Today is Tuesday, so it's not a swimming day, right? Oh, well, actually, in this weather outside, it's swimming day every day, but it's not a YMCA day for you. But great to have you, have all of you with me this morning, to be together. That's a better way of putting it. You're not with me. Well, you're with me, but I'm also with you. So we're together. And let's see. I don't know that I have any specific prayer requests to share. Just those general ones that we've been doing. You continue to pray for John as he continues to recover from his procedure. Seems to be doing well, which is wonderful news. And continue prayers for Jolene and her family as she is under hospice care. All right, so we're gonna jump in. We're gonna start with we're doing chapter 28, 1 Samuel 28, and we're gonna do 29 as well. But we're gonna start 28 at verse 3, because we read 1 and 2 yesterday. They actually finish up the story that is told in chapter 27. They don't finish the story, because that story is going to be, we're going to come back to. See, when we left, what happened yesterday, right? What happened yesterday was David has escaped into the Philistine territory, into Gath. into Gath, and he goes to the king of Gath, Achish, and he asks for a place to live. He said, I shouldn't be here. So sets him up with a place. David and his troops have raided various places in Philistine territory, enemies of Judah, but lies to the king and says, oh, we invaded places in Judah. Here's the stuff we got. And the king kind of loves David, we might say, really adopts him in, says, oh, good work, good work. Hey, when I'm going to pull you in to my army. I'm going to pull you into the army as we're massing for war against Israel, against Judah. I said, I want you on my army. And David says, okay, you'll see what we can do. And he says, in fact, I'm going to make you my royal guard. David is kind of trapped in that, he said. So what's going to happen to David? We have to wait to find out, because the author or editors changes scenes. That's why we stopped. Verses 1 and 2 continue that story, or finish that, come to that nice break. So now we're going to pick up with verse 3. Good morning, Marcia. Walking and listening. Great. Glad you're able to do two things at the same time. I often can't walk and chew gum, right? Good morning, John and Cindy. Great to have you with us this morning as well. This is wonderful stuff. Wonderful stuff. All right. So 1 Samuel 28, verse 3. We've left David. The author leaves David and returns to Saul. And he reminds us with these very first words, these first 4 words, reminds us. Now Samuel had died. Okay. So we remember Samuel's dead. Samuel was the prophet who anointed Saul and anointed David. And Samuel and Saul had a rough relationship. Last time that Samuel and Saul were together, Saul was lying on the ground, naked, raving mad, right in front of him, right? So we remember those things. That's what these first few words are to remind us. They're reminding us that Samuel is dead, but they also are meant to remind us of that relationship that Saul and Samuel had, okay? So I'm going to reread that. Now Samuel had died, and all Israel had mourned for him and buried him in Ramah, his own city. So dead and buried. Saul had expelled the mediums and the wizards from the land. The Philistines assembled and came and encamped at Shunem. Saul gathered all Israel, and they encamped at Gilboa. When Saul saw the army of the Philistines, he was afraid, and his heart trembled greatly. When Saul inquired of Yahweh, Yahweh did not answer him, not by dreams, by Urim, or by prophets. Pause. Okay. We're also reminded in this passage of Saul's character and a couple of the things about him. We remember that he was very into ceremonies and rites and like guarantees, we might say, in relationship to God. Wouldn't go out into battle without offering sacrifices. Wouldn't go out into battle without checking with God. Now, those can be good things, but we're reminded that he never did like anything on his own, and he didn't come to God. He doesn't come to God with a plan. He doesn't like figure out a military strategy of what to do. His son Jonathan is the one that did that. His son Jonathan acted, but we're reminded that Saul was the one who wasn't so much active, didn't seem to want to act until it was almost too late, until he had no more choice either. So he goes to God to find out, what should I do? Rather than coming up with a plan and saying to God, will you support this kind of thing? Is this what I should do? He's going to God asking, what should I do? Oh, good morning, hon. see that you're here with us this morning as well. So we're reminded of that. And Saul does it, we're told, in three ways. He is looking for God's direction. These are the typical three and accepted and approved ways of speaking with God, of getting messages from God. And the scripture is loaded with examples, we might say. Through dreams. But God, he wasn't able to communicate with God in dreams. By Urim. Now, he only mentions Urim, but we would presume that he also means and Thummim. Those are those lots that they used to cast. It's casting of lots, perhaps ones that give simple answers, yes or no kind of thing. But that was the second one. And no answer, nothing's coming through that. Or by prophets. And the irony here, we might say, is because Saul killed all the prophets, right? Except for the one who got away. And the one who got away is the one that took the ephod, and we might presume also the Urim and Thummim, the official Urim and Thummim. So Saul is not getting answers from God by the three accepted and approved methods of messages from God. And we're also told that the idea of mediums and wizards and necromancers is actually a very good word for what this woman is when we get to her, rather than witch, is basically anathema to Jewish culture, especially at the time. It is forbidden to try to talk with the dead and all that. And Saul, it would seem, was him being this very strict, we might say very strict religiousness to his personality, had banned it and had cast them away and sent the last ones into hiding. So picking up from there, verse 7, that's all the information. We get all that information from those first 6 verses. Verse 7, then Saul said to his servants, seek out for me a woman who is a medium, so that I may go to her and inquire of her. His servants said to him, there is a medium at Endor. Pause. Inquire of her. That word inquire, remember, in Hebrew is Saal. It is the root of his name. It is the root of Saul. So Saul is going to Saul from a medium, from a necromancer. There is a medium at Endor, and it's not the moon of Endor. If you're Star Wars, you'll get it. Continuing, verse 8. So Saul disguised himself and put on other clothes and went there, he and 2 men with him. They came to the woman by night, and he said, consult a spirit for me and bring up for me the one whom I name to you. Pause. So he puts on a disguise, black frame glasses and funny nose and a mustache, whatever, and goes by night, so very secretively, to this woman, to the necromancer. Consult a spirit. He's seeking help from her. So the 3 approved methods of getting messages from God didn't work. So he's trying one that's disapproved, that's not allowed. And he's going to ask for a specific spirit. Now, the author doesn't tell us who that is yet. Who was Saul going to ask to talk to? The woman said to him, surely you know what Saul has done, how he has cut off the mediums and the wizards, the necromancers, from the land. Why then are you laying a snare for my life to bring about my death? Pause. The woman is wary. The woman is wary. She's worried. She's concerned. This guy's trying to trick me. She doesn't recognize him. We're not told yet that she recognized him. But Saul swore to her by Yahweh, as Yahweh lives, no punishment shall come upon you for this thing. Pause. Now, isn't it ironic that he's swearing by God, by Yahweh, when Yahweh is the one who wouldn't speak, who hasn't been answering him, hasn't been speaking to him? Continuing. Then the woman said, "Whom shall I bring up to you?" He answered, "Bring up Samuel for me." When the woman saw Samuel, she cried out with a loud voice. And the woman said to Saul, "Why have you deceived me? You are Saul." Pause. Now, what's interesting here is, and maybe it's just a mistake, you may say, a lapse on the part of the author, but notice, she doesn't actually call up Samuel. We're not told anything about that. It's written as if Samuel just appears at the mention of his name. He's there before her, and apparently only she can see him, but she hasn't done anything to summon Samuel. It doesn't, which you would think the author would at least say so. So the woman summoned Samuel and he appeared. No, it doesn't say that. He says, "Bring up Samuel for me." When the woman saw Samuel. So it's as if only saying his name brought him around. Continuing, verse 13, the king said to her, "Have no fear. What do you see?" The woman said to Saul, "I see a divine being," can also be read as a god, "coming up out of the ground." He said to her, "What is his appearance?" She said, "An old man is coming up. He is wrapped in a robe." So Saul knew that it was Samuel, and he bowed with his face to the ground and did obeisance. Pause. So she sees a god, this divine being coming up from the ground. Now, we might be confused by that or think that that's weird, but remember that for in the theology of the Hebrews and the Jews of the time, there's no real afterlife. There's no real life afterlife. There's only the place of the dead, which in a thinking of layers of reality, or it's above and beneath. Above is only for God and God's angels and other eternal divine beings, perhaps, whatever. And then there's the mortal plane, and then beneath is the place of the dead. All dead. We're not talking about hell where bad people go for eternal punishment or anything like that. This is just the place of the dead. Place of the dead. And so even though he looks like a divine being, Samuel is coming up from the place of the dead. So coming up from the place of the dead. She describes him as an old man, which would agree with the depiction of Samuel, and says he is wrapped in a robe. And Saul knew that it was Samuel. Now, what is it about this that made Saul realize that it was Samuel? Say, yeah, it's Samuel. Was it the fact that he was old, that it looked like an old man? Or was it the fact that he's wrapped in a robe? Actually, it could be, we don't have to pick one or the other. It could be a combination of both. But the point I want to make clear is the robe, that word is important. Let's just think about how many times it's been used and what it means, what it symbolizes. It does symbolize a robe would be worn by royalty and also by prophets. So he's wearing a prophet's robe. But we would think back to the many times of talking about robes and how Saul grabbed Samuel's robe and it tore. And he said, just as, in this way, the Lord, Yahweh, has torn the kingdom away from you and will give it to a neighbor. And it was Saul when he was in the cave, and he had his robe, and then David cut off a piece of his robe. And we're reminded about Jonathan giving his robe to David. And now all these things, this use of robe coming back again and again, it's important, and this is supposed to remind us of that. So this divinish looking being coming up from the place of the dead, old and wrapped in a robe, Saul says, okay, that's Samuel. And he bows before him, face to the ground, and does obeisance. Continuing. Then Samuel said to Saul, why have you disturbed me by bringing me up? Saul answered, I am in great distress, for the Philistines are warring against me, and God has turned away from me and answers me no more, either by prophets or by dreams. Pause. Because, again, the prophets, because you killed them all except for the one that got away, or by dreams. So I have summoned you to tell me what I should do. So we see, pause, we see Saul almost, this pathetic creature, can't decide for himself what to do, can't formulate a plan, and he's not getting any answers, not getting any help. Which is in contrast to David, is it not? We've seen David as a man of action, always in communication with God, but has his plans, and is in constant communication with God. And of course, it seems like, God is answering him, but not Saul. Continuing, Samuel said, why then do you ask me? Since Yahweh has turned from you and become your enemy, Yahweh has done to you just as he spoke by me, for Yahweh has torn the kingdom out of your hand and given it to your neighbor, David. Pause. Ooh, so these are the exact same words that he spoke, chapters and chapters ago, with that one little addition. David, he names the neighbor. He names the neighbor. Continuing, because you did not obey the voice of Yahweh and did not carry out his fierce wrath against Amalek. Therefore, Yahweh has done this thing to you today. Moreover, Yahweh will give Israel along with you into the hands of the Philistines, and tomorrow you and your sons shall be with me. Yahweh will also give the army of Israel into the hands of the Philistines. Pause. Ooh, wow. So Samuel has not only said, why are you bothering me? If God's not going to answer you, I'm not going to answer you either. God has become your enemy. Your enemy is giving the kingdom away. And by the way, you and your sons are going to be dead and in the land of the dead with me tomorrow. Wow. Very, very straightforward, very blunt. And it'll be the Philistines that caused this to happen. Continuing. Immediately, Saul fell full length on the ground, filled with fear because of the words of Samuel, and there was no strength in him, for he'd eaten nothing all day and all night. Pause. So he's lying on the ground in front of Samuel, both before and after Samuel speaks, which again reminds us of the last time the two were together, which was, of course, Samuel was still alive then, and now he's dead, but he was lying prostrate, a pathetic creature in front of Samuel, and same thing again. And he is weak because he has eaten nothing all day and all night. And this could be because he was trying to prepare himself for battle, for, as part of a holy war thing, and staying pure and not eating. And we're reminded how he had declared that among all the people, among all his troops that day in the one battle against the Philistines, and how Jonathan almost got killed because he had eaten a little bit of honey. And it was all Saul's fault and mistake. The woman came to Saul, and when she saw that he was terrified, she said to him, your servant has listened to you. I have taken my life in my hand and have listened to what you have said to me. Now, therefore, you also listen to your servant. Let me set a morsel of bread before you. Eat, that you may have strength when you go on your way. Pause. So this speaks wonders about the character of this woman now, doesn't it? She was afraid to do what Saul asked her to do, but she relented and did it, mostly because she found out he was the king, perhaps. And now she's trying to be this, proper host, this thing, and take care of him, take care of his physical needs, and help him. I've listened to you, now listen to me. Continuing, he refused and said, I will not eat. But his servants together with the woman, urged him, and he listened to their words. So he got up from the ground and sat on the bed. Now the woman had a fatted calf in the house. She quickly slaughtered it, and she took flour, kneaded it, and baked unleavened cakes. She put them before Saul and his servants, and they ate. Then they rose and went away that night. Pause. End of chapter 28, but we're going to pause there. So Samuel has told Saul, and the author tells us that Saul will be dead within the day. And then we're given this scene where Saul has his last meal, basically a royal meal, a meal fit for a king, fatted calf, freshly baked unleavened cakes, all good stuff, provided for him by a necromancer in a poor person's house, basically. So it's just an interesting scene. Just an interesting scene when we think about some of those details, isn't it? I think it is anyway. His final meal isn't in the palace. It's not in his home being attended to by numerous servants. It is in the home of presumably a poor woman trying to get by reading tea leaves and stuff like that. And but it's a good meal. It's a good meal. All right. So now what's going to happen? Now, that chapter is seen by some, that story today, especially verses 20, starting with verse 3, that chapter, seems to be in the wrong location, because it's got the Philistines encamped and it has Israel encamped. They haven't done it yet. We're in chapter 29. They're going to start this movement and encampment. So it's almost as if this chapter should take place after 29. But we think, they think, the experts think, and I would agree with them, that the author or editor intentionally put it in there to break up this story of David, to kind of leave us in suspense as far as how is David going to get out of this? His slyness and seems to have trapped him. He seems to have painted himself into a corner, and now must be the royal guard for King Achish of Gath as they prepare for war against Israel. So looked at that way, it makes sense. It splits that up, kind of leaves us hanging in suspense. So where do you think we're going now? We're going back to Gath, or at least back to the Philistine territory. And we're going back to David and Achish, okay? So the Philistines are preparing. Chapter 29, verse 1. Now the Philistines gathered all their forces at Aphek, while the Israelites were encamped by the fountain that is in Jezreel. Pause. Okay, so all the Philistines and Philistia isn't like one country, just as Israel is built up of tribes. Philistia is basically a bunch of city-states, we might say, in a way almost like ancient Greek, because that was Greece, that was the same thing. Many places where they're made up of a bunch of tribes or a bunch of city-states who come together as a confederacy, perhaps, or confederation, for a common purpose, and then go back to their own places and stuff like that. And Israel is the same way now. They become one kingdom under David, but still at this time they're just tribes who come together from time to time, and that's what seems to be happening here. But the Philistines, that's the point I want to make, are doing the same thing, and they gather their forces at Aphek. We remember Aphek from back in chapter 4 as the place where a battle took place, and that's where Israel lost the the ark of Yahweh in that disastrous battle. So perhaps the author is reminding us of that by starting off with this, saying, and almost giving us a sense of foreshadowing, like, oh, things can't be good if that's where this is taking place. And the Israelites encamped by the fountain there is in Jezreel. Continuing, as the lords of the Philistines were passing on by hundreds and by thousands, and David and his men were passing on in the rear with Achish, the commanders of the Philistines said, "What are these Hebrews doing here?" Pause. Okay, so we got a couple words to talk about. We've got the lords of the Philistines, or the NIV translates as rulers. Same thing. Those would be like the political rulers, the city-state kings, just like Achish. And so we could say that the king goes out with his troops, and so the kings and their troops are going out, and they're passing by the commanders of the Philistines. The commanders of the Philistines, we might say, like the head generals. They're passing by them, who are going to be in charge of this consolidated army, this Confederate army, as they prepare to do battle. Rather than each battle, rather than each army, each city-state having its own commanders trying to run things, where they've got these commanders to be in charge of the whole battle. And so they're reviewing the troops. Pause a second here, because I see we got a question. Ronnie asks, different locations as in 28? Yes, it is. If you turn back to 28 verse 4, you'll see that the Philistines assembled and came and encamped at Shunem, and Saul had gathered Israel and encamped at Gilboa. Let's not try to make these things make sense or merge, because they're told in different ways for a particular reason. And that's, like I said, that's one of the reasons why some people think that chapter 28 shouldn't be there. It should be in a different location. But the importance of mentioning Aphek here is to trigger those memories about what happened in that battle with the Philistines in Aphek way back at the beginning of 1 Samuel. But great question and great catch. Great question, great catch. The other thing here, so the lords are coming with their troops, the state kings, the kings are bringing their troops forward and in review, we might say, past the commanders. And the commanders probably want to see what all the troops look like so that they can plan and say, okay, this group looks like they're the best group of warriors. We're putting them in first, or maybe we're going to reserve them to be a bit behind the line. We might sacrifice these troops first, that kind of thing. I don't know what their process of thinking was. I'm not a military strategist, but it could have been some of those kind of things. But that's what they're doing. That's the point here. And they recognize David and his troops, not by name and not specifically, but they recognize the type of people they are, because they use that particular word, Hebrews. They do not call them Israelites. So as a reminder, if you went through the book of Exodus with me many months ago, or if you worshiped with us just 2 Sundays ago when we talked about this, that word Hebrew is not identical with Israelite, okay? Especially not by this point. Israelite would be nationality. Israeli would be nationality. Hebrew is lower class, cast aside. So they're the poor. They're maybe rabble rousers. They're not really nice people, we might think, or whatever. Those kind of things. They're from the edges of society, and that's who David is connecting with. The ones that are looked down upon, the ones that aren't part of good society, so to speak. They've been mentioned before, and we've spoken about that, about David's, the type of people that are joining up with David. They see in him maybe they see in him a deliverer from their situation. Those are the kind of people that David seems to have this great connection with. And we might say, that's a reflection of the fact that he is a person after God's own heart. But that's the point here. They're using this derogatory term. What are these Hebrews doing here? It doesn't say, what are these Judahites doing here? What are these Israelites doing here? What are these Hebrews doing here? Okay. So picking up from there, I know it was the middle of the phrase. Achish said to the commanders of the Philistines, "Is this not David, the servant of King Saul of Israel, who has been with me now for days and years? Since he deserted to me, I have found no fault in him to this day." Pause. So Achish speaks up to the commanders, to the top generals, the big brass, the Pentagon, the Department of Defense, whatever, that and identifies him by name. Is this not David? Yes, servant of the king of King Saul of Israel, but he's been with me now for days and years. A reminder back to the end of 27, when it said he was with them for a year and 4 months. And I've never found anything wrong with them. So he speaks to his defense. But the commanders of the Philistines are angry with him. And the commanders of the Philistines said to him, "Send the man back, so that he may return to the place that you have assigned to him. He shall not go down with us to battle, or else he may become an adversary to us in the battle. For how could this fellow reconcile himself to his Lord? Would it not be with the heads of the men here? Is this not David, of whom they sing to one another in dances? Saul has killed his thousands, and David his 10,000s." Pause. Okay. So by identifying him by name, the commanders now recognize who he is, and they've heard these stories. They've heard the songs about David, and very reasonably so, suspect that if we enter into battle with him, he's going to turn on us. He's going to turn on us. How better to reconcile himself than by killing a whole bunch of us and rescuing his people from Judah? Then Achish called David and said to him, "As Yahweh lives, you have been honest, and to me it seems right that you should march out and in with me in the campaign, for I have not found nothing wrong in you from the day of your coming to me until today." Pause. Now it is interesting that Achish uses the word Yahweh in this vow, since he would not be a Yahwist. Perhaps, excuse me one moment, I forgot to turn off my microphone, my thing, my phone, so I could hear it. He's not a Yahwist. He's not a believer in Yahweh. Perhaps he did use it as because of David, like out of respect for David, or perhaps equally likely it's a later insertion by an editor or an author of the story, putting words. So more or less anachronistic, putting words in the king's mouth that weren't used. Whatever. The point is, he makes this declaration, swears to it. "I've got nothing against you. I have found nothing wrong with you, in you, from the day of your coming to me until today." Continuing, "Nevertheless, the lords do not approve of you." Pause. Now he doesn't mention the commanders, he mentions the lords, but presumably the lords, the other kings of Philistia, have spoken with Achish and said, "Look, you got to send them back. We need this. We need these commanders. We need these commanders. So just send them back." Continuing, "So go back now and go peaceably. Do nothing to displease the lords of the Philistines." Pause. Sort of an undertone in there, perhaps hidden in there is a warning to David, like, don't do anything wrong, because to displease the lords of the Philistines. Almost like your life depends on your good behavior. Continuing, David said to Achish, "But what have I done? What have you found in your servant from the day I entered into your service until now, that I should not go and fight against the enemies of my lord the king?" Pause. Now, it's interesting. This obviously is entirely tongue-in-cheek, or presumably entirely tongue-in-cheek. David, you can almost hear David audibly going, "Whoo, that one was close. We're getting out of here, right? We're getting that. Whoo, that was close." However, David might also have wanted to be part of it, thinking that he could have turned, just as the commanders had feared, turned and killed all of them and made his way back into Judah as victorious, victorious warrior. But notice what he says. He says, "Against the enemies of my lord the king." He doesn't say "of you, my king," or anything. He doesn't name the king. So is he meaning Achish, or is this a double meaning, referring to King Saul, that he could turn on the enemies of King Saul? Cheryl says, "Feel kind of sad for Achish." Achish was definitely put into a bad situation. He has believed David. He believed David's lies. He thought David was good and he was getting rich from David's endeavors, and wants to show his support of David. And perhaps he just, he wasn't the strongest and most powerful of all the kings of Philistia, and kind of had to submit to their will, whatever. So he does come out to be sort of a sad character. So someone we should feel, a sympathetic character would be a better way of saying that. Someone about whom we could feel sad. Yes. Continuing, verse 9, Achish replied to David, "I know that you are as blameless in my sight as an angel of God. Nevertheless, the commanders of the Philistines have said," here he says the commanders, "he shall not go up with us to the battle. Now then, rise early." A pause. I'm going to pause a moment, because this next section is longer. I'm going to read from the NRSV. If you're following the NIV, yours is going to be a little bit shorter. There's another extra sentence, you might say, or very long phrase or phrases in the NRSV. What it is the NIV follows closer to the original Greek, and for some reason the NRSV follows the Latin, the Septuagint, which has this longer piece in it. Could be that in some early documents this was there. In the early document that they used to translate it into Latin, it was there, but in other Greek documents, or perhaps even older Greek documents, it's not. Whatever, but I'm reading the NRSV. So verse 10, "Now then rise early in the morning, you and the servants of your Lord who came with you, and go to the place that I have appointed for you," back to Ziklag. "As for the evil report that's been communicated by the commanders, do not take it to heart, for you have done well before me. Start early in the morning and leave as soon as you have light." So David set out with his men early in the morning to return to the land of the Philistines, but the Philistines went up to Jezreel. End of chapter 29. So we'll find out tomorrow what happens next for David, for Saul, for Achish, for Israel, for all of the Philistines. We're going to find out all about all of that tomorrow. Well, tomorrow and on Thursday, we'll find out all those things. So my friends, that's it for today. Appreciate you joining with me this morning. I pray that this has been beneficial to you, that you have learned something or relearned something. And hang on one sec. Yeah, that you've learned something or relearned something, that God has spoken to you in some way through what we've said and read this morning, as you go about your days. Not just today, but every day. Keep those eyes and ears, physical and spiritual, open to everything that our living, loving, active God is doing in your life and in the lives of those around you. When you see it and you hear it, Say thank you, God, and then tell somebody about him. Until we meet again, my friends, be blessed. Be blessed. Bye.